Bonjour à tous, merci de nous.
So hello everybody, thank you for joining us for this session with Ed Solomon. It'll be in English. So thank you, Ed, for coming along tonight.
Just really quickly, can you tell us just a little bit of your experience and how did you did get you did work with Steven Soderbergh on Mosaic?
Yeah, when I've worked for a lot of decades in various parts of Hollywood in television and in film, and it would be easy to look at the few movies that have made it here in my career and think, well, that's what I do, right? Well, then, but those few movies are really a small sample of what really I have spent most of my life working on, and most of the stuff I do doesn't get made because it's either too weird or too experimental or people aren't doing it yet or whatever. So Steven, who I'd never worked with before but who I knew a little bit socially, contacted me about 4 years ago and said, okay, here's one we might get you to do, you might be interested in doing. So it was an opportunity to work with Steven Soderbergh, one of the great directors on the planet, have total creative freedom on something that is actually going to get made, and have the support of HBO. So I was like, yeah, I mean, you bet. And I had just come off of a very bad personal situation, basically, a divorce. And, financially, it might have been a lot safer to just go do some stupid comic book movie or something, but I've never had to make a decision based on, I've always made my choices, even when I've had no money, like now, on what is like creatively amazing and fascinating and it turned out to be one of the great creative experiences of my life, which I judge by feeling like I came out of the situation a better writer than I went into it. So the opportunity was like a no-brainer for me.
Can we maybe watch the teaser first?
Yes, absolutely. So this is 50 seconds long. So there are two ways to view Mosaic in the world. One way was the way we initially designed it, which was an interactive branching narrative app that you could use on your phone, on your iPad, computer, Apple TV, whatever. And the other way is a more, quote, traditional way, which is the way that it's available here in France on
OCS.
OCS. It aired in January, and I think it's available on demand, or I don't know how it works here, but has anyone I'm just curious, has anyone had a chance to see the other version of it? Probably not, I'm guessing. The branch, not the branching version, but the actual broadcast version of Mosaic?
Est-ce que des gens ont vu la série sur OCS?
Few people. Okay. So that way of viewing it is a more so-called traditional, objectively told story in 6 episodes. It's like a 6-episode limited series. Initially, we were only going to do a branching narrative version, but when we started building out the tech and doing some tests, we realized that we wanted to make it available for more than just the original audience, which was for people who had iPhones and Apple products. So we realized we need to build it out for Android and then for web and etc. So we needed a little more money, and simultaneous to that, HBO, which had funded it, said to Steven, we'd kind of also like to do this on our network, and also for people who won't have the technology to be able to view it the way we had originally done it. So both sides agreed, like, could we get a little bit more money for production and to build out our tech? And then Steven said he'd be happy to do a second version of it. So what was interesting to me as a writer and a person who has been involved in narrative for my whole life is not only did we have the challenge of trying to put together a branching narrative story that's 7.5 hours long that needs to work from all different angles. Literally every character in the story has to be worthy of it being their own movie. And we can talk about that coming up. But we also had to do it in a way that could also be told in a more traditional form. So this is the trailer, just to give you a sense of what it is. This is the trailer for the branching narrative version of it.
Steven Soderbergh and HBO present a new storytelling experience. A story that you navigate.
There he is, right there. What do you think?
A story that lets you go deeper.
Joel, hey, I want to come clean about some things.
To see the bigger picture. A story with multiple perspectives. And when it's all over, you'll want to look again. And again. And again. Mosaic, a new storytelling experience. Learn more at watchmosaic.com.
So,
So that's it.
Donc voilà,
That's the whole piece.
c'est ça.
je rappelle le principe, c'est un question-réponse. Donc, si vous avez des questions,
So if you've got any questions, raise your hand and please take part.
maybe first question is, as a feature film screenwriter, how did you work on Mosaic? Was there a lot of changes for you on the process, or not, maybe?
Well, when you're writing a regular, so-called regular movie, you're asking yourself several questions. One of them is, what's the point of view in this given moment? And at any moment, you're asking yourself, whose eyes are we seeing this part of the story through? The other thing you're asking yourself is this scene that I'm writing absolutely essential to keep the plot moving forward? And so much of what you're doing is trying to get rid of everything that, isn't absolutely necessary. So the first thing that we realized in doing this was we have room for all sorts of things that we would normally be getting rid of. We became very fascinated very early on in this notion that one person's, like we all go through our life as the central character, let's say, in our own story, in our own movie. Not really stopping to think about how much of a bit player we are in everyone else's story and how much of the star of their own movie they are. There's an old phrase in Hollywood, every villain is the hero of his or her own story. Well, this was really the case here. And what we were trying to explore was the nature of just how subjective our own experiences really are. And we didn't really know going into it what we were doing, honestly. We just knew that we were experimenting with this form, and we were kind of, we were learning. Okay, so when you write a regular story, for me, any story has its own organic rules, and part of my job, I feel like the writer's job is to determine what are the organic rules of this story. How does this story want to be told? A lot of people who have been doing this for a long time fall into the trap of thinking that the rules they used for their last thing apply to this thing. And to me, I was talking about this a little earlier today with someone, and I was realizing, while talking about it, part of the job is to shed your old habits on every new thing that you do. So not only were we trying to figure out what is the real story here, but also how do you tell a real story in a branching narrative format with interactivity happening in a way that it's still a story and not a game. So we made a decision early on. Because I said, like in one of our very first story meetings, I said, so what are the rules here? Like, how do we know there's nothing that preceded this, so we didn't know what we were doing. I was like, I would get 10. Sorry, that's okay. I was like, do we want to give ourselves any rules? And Stephen said, the only rule is let's just remain interested. let's just do whatever seems interesting at the moment and let the rules kind of tell us what they are.
Right. But how did you proceed to create the story? Can you tell us more about the process of writing and production and I think the test you did?
Oh, yeah, okay. So what happened was, so I got this call from Steven saying, are you interested in doing this? He was noodling with a little 10-minute idea that he had written himself called The Departure. And what it was a little, he wanted to set a story in a very, very controlled environment and just do a demo shoot, just literally shoot for one day and see, does this even work as a means of telling a story? So what we did was we threw around a bunch of ideas, and at first we were thinking, you know, I mean, we were just put everything up there. Like, what if, you know, how many choices do we want to give people? How often do we want to let people choose? How many choices to give them at any given moment? And we ended up with a binary thing, just deciding, you know what, right or left for the beginning. So what we did, we decided on, let's do a story, set it in a hotel room about a person having an affair, and you know, if you're watching from the concierge's point of view, you have one sense of it. The bellman's point of view, you have another sense of it. This is, you know, and then it was like, okay, pick one. So which one do you want? All right, that one. And then it goes on. That's basically how it works. You can like scroll up to the next. And that sort of became so Steven shot that literally 76 setups in one day. And then he edited it. And then he took this prototype, which is all it was like this kind of hastily assembled prototype, into HBO. Or he actually we had 3 meetings. He had 3 meetings, I should say. 2 people were interested, and Richard Plepler at HBO said, I'm not going to let you leave the room until we have a deal. So that was when I got a phone call saying, it looks like we're going to be doing this. Do you want to try a long-form version? And I said, yeah, for sure. And then we started talking about, well, what is the right kind of story to be telling in this format?
What is the most important things at this step? It's the story or the device you're working on?
Well, we wanted to make 100% certain that we developed the tech alongside the story and not ahead of the story. We thought to ourselves, we definitely want like a small set of characters. You know, Mosaic is a murder mystery set in a small town, basically. And we wanted to make sure that we were not falling in love with the gimmick and the tech, but rather telling a story that not only worked well for this form, but was best told in this form. Now, did we end up with that? I don't know. I think it took us 3 years of working on Mosaic to actually understand what the form wants to be. And I've just spent the last 1.5 years writing another one with Steven as well. A whole new story, new characters, and having learned what we learned, it's like taking it exponentially further, and I'm starting yet another one now. I think one of the things that we really wanted to make sure we did was not fall in love with our tech, but tell a story scene by scene by scene that would be worthy of any play or movie or TV show that we were doing. Start there knowing that even if the device itself didn't quite work, at least we would have something creatively that we knew we could stand behind. So that led to Mosaic. So should we show a little bit of that, or? I guess you already are.
You want just a first minute?
Do you want to, I tell you what, because I can't, oh, here we go. So let me start again here on Mosaic here really quick. Basically, the way Mosaic works is you download it. It's a total of about 7.5 hours of material. There's the story itself, and you're given a series of choices along the story where you can pick a character and follow one character or follow another character. You're also given the opportunity along the way to stop and dig deeper into parts of the story, like things we call discoveries, which are, you know, other scenes or texts. There's like long articles. There's voice messages. There's all this sort of other stuff you're allowed you can look at. It's not choose your own adventure. You are not making any decisions that affect the story at all. And we tell you that up front. This is a curated story that we are controlling. Your choices are simply whose perspective am I choosing to see? We were not interested in ceding any of the control to the viewer. I think it was really important for Stephen at every minute to go, I am controlling everything that you see. This is still you being told a story. And we're not pretending that you're choosing the story. Do you know there's a Disneyland ride, Autopia? Do you know which one I'm talking about? It's basically a kid's ride that you sit in the car, you have a steering wheel, and you're allowed to move the wheel. You turn the wheel and the car moves a little bit, but basically it's on a rail that's taking you where it wants you to go. You're obviously not having the opportunity to drive anywhere in Disneyland that you want. You're just on this path. Well, we didn't want that. We didn't want fake autonomy. We wanted it to be a story you are told. And there's some reasons for that, which I'll get into, but...
Yeah, how do you write a story with interaction and without too many possibilities for the audience?
Well, that was a tricky one. The first thing we did was when we designed it, we wanted to make sure that we always returned to certain hubs in the narration so that we didn't lose control. Because, of course, if you can imagine the math. You know, if you go this way and then there's a split, and then another split, and then another split, it just branches so far that it just goes out of control. Especially for our first one, we wanted to make it so that, in fact, I'll show you really quickly, and then I'll go back to the mosaic thing here. I'll show you the initial, these were my first notes on a board. Imagine a room, not this big, but like, it was about 1,200 square foot room, all whiteboards. And we had no ability to do it any other way. I would literally write on the wall, literally, like everything was written like on the walls so that we could sit in the room itself and look at the story. So I began just kind of, these are just obviously my own little scribbles in this room. This was our first outline on the wall. This was when we decided to go from talking about it, and this is, by the way, this is 3 whiteboards out of 20 whiteboards, just so you get a sense of perspective. There was a certain day I remember, we were a few months into the talking about it, and Stephen said, let's put it up on the board. And it's like, oh, here we are in that moment. And so, you know, in order to keep control of it, you can see these, you know, it's a little bit hard to see, but let me see if I can find, I don't know if I have an example of the hubs I'm talking about, but we went from handwriting it on the whiteboards to then turning it into index cards, and we had 4 giant sides of the room, and I wrote everything that happened chronologically. I even in some detail like that, you can see that's time of day. Brown is one of the characters. Green is one of the other characters. There was blue, there were literally 25 different colors for all the different characters going along. On about, 1, 2, 3, whatever, like 2 of the walls, I hand wrote literally every scene in chronological order. We transferred that to an index card. And then we took the index cards and walk them over to the other side of the wall and put that in story order, like that. Now imagine, you can see in the corner there that it goes around. Imagine that this is 1/2 of one wall, and there's 4 walls, so 8 times that, going around the room. And that was our first story outline from a very working outline. And you can sort of see, in order for us to make it work, we had to keep returning to these hubs, this little, like, you see the little patch of white? These hubs where the story all converged. And so we, as the creators of it, could keep track of it and then let it open up again and go on. This was our rough working version in 1,200 square feet. Then we moved to Utah for production. And we had a room which we all stayed in the same condo complex when we were shooting. And Stephen is also the editor. Stephen is the cinematographer, the camera operator, the director, and the editor. So Stephen's editing room was in one of the rooms. Then there was a shared room that Stephen and I used in common, which was we called it our board room, is where we had the boards. And that's this room. That was our final outline. And that was in the room that was between my writing room and Stephen's editing room. And every day in production, it was crazy. Every day in production, we would walk into this space the night before and go, okay, so we have Petra's line. Petra's in this scene tomorrow, coming from this way, and she just came from this and this and this. She crosses. Oh, that's right, and that's Joel's scene is coming this way, and and sometimes. You know how in a regular movie, you're thinking to yourself, well, let's see, what are we shooting tomorrow? And it's complicated enough to figure out what you're trying. Okay, sometimes we would have 3 or even 4 lines converging in one scene, and we would have to, it was a nightmare for the script supervisor, as you can imagine, and the AD. They were great, but oh my God, it was hard. I will show. Okay, it's Nathan's birthday, by the way, in case any of you want to send him something. And then I will show this, and I'm going to show it really fast so you don't have, I'll show you why. This is my new one, and I'm doing it fast so nobody can take any pictures. Okay, sorry, there. Yeah, anyway, so that became our, and by the way, that was our first structure. We went in and revised that structure in post-production quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions dans la salle? Pas encore.
Yeah, maybe just one. Because you said that you wrote you thought it in terms of sequences, so not in terms of episodes. So maybe that kind of modular system, which induces maybe another typology of narration as well. So the notion of modularity is seriality.
So the question being, I didn't think in terms of episodes at all. And I often tend to write in sequences. In general, sorry, I'm not sure if I understand what the question is.
Yeah, in this sense, in sense of how we would structure the rhythm, where you bring someone and...
So a typical 90-page script or 110-page screenplay, which now seems like nothing to me. It's like, a movie? Those are complicated and hard, and they used to be hard to keep. For me as a writer, and I've been doing this 35 years, keeping a movie in my head, a whole movie, is hard. It seems to fall out of my periphery. I know it begins, and then this is the part I'm working on, and then I know it's going over there, but it's very hard to hold in my head. So now we had to hold 5 times this amount of material, not just in a way that are 5 individual stories, but overlapping, linking what stories where, you know, you see only one part of it from this way, but you see a whole other part of it going that way. That was really complicated. The only way I could do it was to break them down like individual stories, like they were individual movies. I basically was writing 4 movies or 5 movies at one time. That was the easiest way I could think of doing it. I know that doesn't sound easy. So that's what this is. That's what this is. This was just one of the characters' lines, Joel. And this was, oh, I don't know how that, oh, thank you. This is only one tiny piece of it. Joel's line had 12 Roman numerals on it. But the first 2, like, so there's Roman numeral 1, Joel's new normal life, 1, Okeechobee Day, and then those each are the, like, beats in the scene, and then B, Dock Shack, later, C, home, night, D, Dock Shack, next day. These are just notes to myself. What does Joel want? Why do we only care, you know, what are we rooting for Joel to, like, just notes for myself about, very specifically, if this were only Joel's movie, what would his story be? What is his thrust? I did that for Joel. I did that. There's a character called Petra. There's a character called Nate. I did it for Olivia. I did it for every character. I just wrote, and then I wrote their movie after I'd outlined it all. After we had this, I then just wrote them in straight lines so that no matter what choice the viewer took, there would be a movie for them. And then, of course, as you get further into it, there are many more possibilities. You know, keeping track of, you know, making sure that every story was its own thrust was. So that's how we did it.
So you didn't change a line during the film, during the shooting?
This was an interesting one in that way. Almost every Hollywood movie that I've worked on, not everyone, but a lot of them, especially recently, your script is kind of like a suggestion to the actors about what they might want to say. It's such a, if I may I swear here? It's a fucking pain in the ass, and it's soul-crushing, and it sucks. I mean, and it's why Hollywood is essentially dead as a source of creativity. I mean, it's dead. I mean, Hollywood's central metaphor is the star, right? It's like, you know, the movie star, the star. And I swear Hollywood is, but you know what a star is? I mean, a star is basically you're looking at light from a system that died eons ago, but you're still seeing the light. Those are the movies you're seeing now. It's like the light from a system that is dead. Anyway, I was going to say don't quote me on that, but it's over. So in a Hollywood screenplay, I mean, and I was just coming off of a Hollywood movie where, oh my God, where like every scene I wrote had to be vetted through like the producer and then the other producer and then the studio and then the director and then back to the producer, and it was horrible. So juxtapose that with suddenly Steven saying, hey, you want to do this new thing? We're going to have total creative freedom. Amazing. So Steven's rule to the actors is, on time, your line's memorized. So did we change a lot? Yeah, we changed a ton on set, but just because we got ideas, not because the actors were ad-libbing. What we found was, because this form is so new, we would be on the floor, you know, in production, and we would just go, oh my God, what if Matthew's point of view of the scene is entirely different from Ed's point of view? And then I'd scurry off and write a whole new version at lunch or whenever, or sometimes I wouldn't even have that much time, you know, just write a whole new version, give it to the actors and say, oh, guess what, we're doing this a whole other way now. Or we'd go, oh my God, why didn't we think of this? Next time we got to do blah, blah, blah. Next time we got to do blah, blah, blah. So we shot in 2 sequences. We shot the, there's some stuff that takes place present day and some stuff that takes place in the past. We shot the present day stuff first, and we shot it in the fall, and then we took a 6-week hiatus, and then we shot in the winter in the snow, the stuff that takes place in the past. I had about 265 pages written for the I wrote the first stuff first because we were shooting it first. We had about 265 pages and added 100 pages during production, just of new ideas that we were getting. Took the hiatus, wrote the other like 200 pages, which we didn't actually add much to, partially because we had learned enough. So yeah.
Ok. Une question là-bas.
I'm interested, can you tell us more about the map of the characters, that dark screen and then menu? Because Dickens would write in chapters, and actually now we're going to read stuff as novels. It's a different rhythm within that. And so like where you choose to put the breaks and how you stop them being kind of like a break in the story, or do you use that? Because is it that you come back? Perfect. Is it that you come back to a main menu and then you select your next one? Or does it kind of, how do you do the breaks or the switching of perspective?
Oh.
Should I repeat the whole thing? Did you hear?
Well, in Mosaic, and I'll show you. In Mosaic, this is what it ended up being. We filmed with like 40 chapters, and we ended up trimming it to a third of that amount. We ended up blending it because for a variety of reasons. But Mosaic is, you sort of move through a regular episode and reach the end of the episode, and then you have a choice between one character or another character. And it actually comes to a stop, and you choose, and then you go on. So it's like at the end of an episode is a natural end. And working on a few new ones now where they're paced entirely differently and the choosing mechanisms happen entirely differently in ways that are appropriate for those stories. So for instance, in Mosaic, and I apologize, there's no sound, but this is probably just as fine. Can you guys do that as, oh, there you go. So you make your first choice. The story begins, that's Sharon Stone's character. She actually gave an amazing performance. And they're talking about all sorts of like Emmy Award stuff for her. So basically, the story starts, and it's the beginning of what turns out later you find out is a scam on Sharon Stone's character. But so the thing begins, and I'll just go forward here. You get to, oh, do you see this little blip on the screen right there? That's one of those discoveries where you can go and explore that if you want, or you can stay with the story as is happening. There's a, oh, you can't see him. It's me on screen. I know it's usually, when it's not so dim, my presence just lights up the screen, but. So you reach the kind of end, you reach the end of the chapter, and now you've had a chance to kind of get to know all these characters, and I'll explain a key mistake that we made early on in production. So I'll just show you what the transition looks like. I'm sorry you can't hear the dialogue, but it's brilliant, I promise. So then you have a choice. Pick one, pick the other, whatever. Which one do you want? Doesn't matter. Set up. So, and he goes on. I mean, and Stephen wanted, because the story's about art, and a lot of the characters in the story are artists, he wanted it to be very painterly, and in fact, the story map, which we'll go back to, now you see that you've seen the first chapter, so that's lit up. We had a different artist do each of the map in spots. You've seen that, it's given a check. You have access now to those two since you've seen the first one. Let's say we stay in the setup until the end. You'll only have access to those. You won't have access to that one. So that's how we did it. I mean, initially, in our initial design, as I think you could see, actually I don't know if you can see it here, but, oh yeah, can you? Okay, do you see on the left, do you see those little white cards on the left? That was initially the beginning of the story. It was, we said to each other, let's just make you choose right away. Like to teach people that you're going to have to make a choice. So initially the story began with Garrett Hedlund's character, Joel, away in Louisiana, having vowed to never go back to this town, and this woman shows up and says, I need you to help me get my brother out of jail. He was put in jail, and he doesn't belong there. And he says, no, I'm never going back to Summit. And she says, you're the only one that can help me. And he says, no, and she leaves. It's 2 minutes long, and at the end of that, you had to choose between her and him. And we found two problems with that when we were testing it in post-production. The first was people felt like they didn't know either character and didn't care. There was like two random choices, and it created a lot of anxiety. How do I choose? And why do I choose? And whoa, it kind of freaked them out. But it created a bigger problem for us, which was it made people think that it was a game that they were playing where they were supposed to be the detective, which was not what we were trying to do. And so we went and we took, do you see that the red stuff on the top right? That was the Olivia stuff. Well, in the part that I showed you, you saw Sharon Stone, that's Olivia. We actually took stuff that you didn't find out until way at the end, and we put it at the beginning, so you really spend a lot of time with Sharon Stone's character before she's murdered, and it made you feel much more involved in the story, but it also set a rhythm that was more what we had intended, more novelistic and less game-like. That's the big thing, and I think it's the thing that Alon was talking about at the 12:30 talk, which is what is the difference between narrative, between story, and experience? I mean, to be more specific, what's the difference between story and what purpose does story serve in our lives? And what is experience like that just happens to be sequential? So it's like, you know, you can be in a game and people go, games have stories? And I go, yeah, they do have stories in that stuff happens after something else happens, after something else happens. But is that actually a story in the sense that we human beings need stories? And that's the central question that we're working on.
How can you embrace the story as an audience? How did you work to give people some emotion, maybe?
Okay, so this is the fundamental question that all of us, and probably all of us in this room, are grappling with in all new media, which is, how do you involve a viewer in a story in a way that does not keep waking them out of the dream? Because to me, that is the key question. And I think Mosaic has a certain pace, and it's very much a story. And the choices are designed to come at natural chapter ends. So you click and then you keep going. There is something that we, as all of us, as storytellers interested in new media, have to keep in mind, which is when you make a viewer make a choice, you're actually switching them from the receiving end, the emotional end. People receive stories emotionally. That's why in theaters, lights go down, in the theater, and lights go up. You control their point of view, and they receive the story, and that creates an emotional connection. But really what creates the emotional connection? And this is the fundamental issue that new media is dealing with. To me, at least, what really creates the connection the emotional connection, is the act of projecting, emotionally projecting onto a character and empathically experiencing their journey as your own. And it's that distance, that bridge, that distance between you and the character, that in that space is the poetry and the resonance and the emotion. When you ask the viewer to step out of that, even for a second, out of that right brain state, and put them into a left brain state, which is the linear, logical, decision-making state, you actually puncture that bubble that contains the viewer and what is being viewed. So that's the key question. How do you make a story where interacting with the story doesn't puncture the experience?
Even through digital devices and all the new tools we have to tell a story? How do you connect with people like that?
Well, I mean, it was really interesting because I've always believed that people are used to interacting with their stories. I mean, if you think about it, how do you read a book? And how have people been reading books for 300 years? You hold it in your hand. You turn the page with your finger. You know, there is a mechanism that is in place in human emotion and psychology for interacting with your story. But to me, the problem that I see with a lot of people working in the interactive space, and we struggled with it too, is how do you create, not for the device, but for the viewer on the other end of the device? In other words, how do you not write to the medium, but through the medium, you know? Like, to me, it's all about a relationship. Like, all writing to me is about a relationship. The relationship between you and the person you're telling the story to. And I think people often think of the audience in the wrong way. Like, whenever a writer comes to me and says, what do you think an audience will like? I have an idea. I think an audience is going to I go, you're lost already. You're done. It's over. It's actually not going to work for you. Because you might as well stop right now. Because that approach is 100% wrong and never works. I was talking about why Hollywood is dead. Hollywood is dead because the decisions about what kind of movies would connect with audiences used to be made by people who were terrible business people, who made decisions based on gut and instinct, who often made mistakes, but actually got it right way more than the people now who are making the decisions, which are based on facts and numbers and figures. While I'm not saying that a lot of people working in new media are making decisions for the same reasons, they're not necessarily making financial decisions. Certainly in new media, you know you're not making financial decisions. We all know it's not like a big money pot right now. I think it could be. But a lot of people are making decisions about what kind of stories to tell in new media, not based on instinct, but actually based on what they think people are into. It's a different version of the same problem, and it's death. It's death before it starts, meaning, you know, kids like this, we're going to do this. Or, you know, people. So the answer to, what is the answer? Jesus, I don't know. The answer is becoming fluent and conversant enough in the possibilities and in this form so that it's not like you're coming up with ideas that would be good in this medium, but you're actually coming up with ideas that are only doable in this medium. And the medium itself is starting to help you. You're channeling kind of both through the medium and I'm getting too abstract. I think it's really important to keep your audience in mind, but not in the way that most people think. Most people think keep the audience in mind means pander to them, condescend to them, or give them what you think they're going to buy, which is total bullshit, and as I said, death. To me, the keeping of the audience in mind means we have always, as storytellers, been involved in a dialogue with our audience. Those of you who have children know that you speak to your 5-year-old child. You can tell a story to your 5-year-old child, and you can tell the same story. I could say to Matthew the same story. I'm going to tell it to him differently, just like I'm going to tell you guys differently, or someone I work with, the same story differently. That's what I mean by keeping your audience in mind. Now go one step further. Alon showed at the 12:30 talk, showed the picture of the people at the cave talking over the fire. That was like an origins of story, as we're sort of told. One human to another human telling a story. Then there's theater, which is one human through other humans telling a story to other humans. Then there's film. There's one or several humans filming people, but essentially telling a story to other humans through film. We use our, I think we have to look at the sort of new technology as the medium through which we're telling the story, as opposed to the thing we're writing the story for, if that makes sense. It is about keeping your audience in mind, but not in that same, not in that way. Okay, sorry, that was like too abstract.
We have a question here.
Yes.
Sorry. I had a question about, you showed in the timeline of the episode mark, and you said that it was for the viewer if you wanted more information, and I was curious. Yes. I was curious to what is more information? Is it another piece of the story, or is it text or whatever?
It's a good question. It's all those different things. Sometimes it's another piece of the story. Sometimes it's let's see what's on here. Sometimes it's there doesn't seem to be one here. Oh, this is a build of a demo, and I apologize. So some of it is not.
I think it was Meet of Olivia Lake. You had something.
That's one. 3.
Yeah. Here's one with 3.
Yeah.
Okay. So sometimes it's a a scene that you can watch.
How does it appear on screen? I'm sorry, but does the user has to use the timeline to see something, or is it appearing as
Yeah, basically the little marker says, "Oh, there's a discovery." Actually, here, let me go past one and you can see it. I think this should show it. Oh yeah, see, so that goes up there. It says discovery in the corner, and then it will disappear. And then it's available to you now or at the end of the scene, or you can simply go on this. And now here, there are 3. There's some art where this is relevant to the story, but there's some artwork that shows up, and you can look at it. And sometimes there's a lengthy newspaper article or a history or something, someone's voicemail, or could end up with a scene where it's tells you something, it puts an entirely different perspective on what was happening. And I think the other one in this is a scene as well. This scene that's showing here, by the way, was our first scene in the piece, as I was telling. This was the beginning of it, where she shows up and tries to talk him into helping. And he says no, and this was the original first chapter, and it came really fast. Anyway, here it goes on.
Sorry, I just have one last question. Is it going to be released on the application form in the rest of, well, in France, or is it planned, or will we have a...
Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, there's a geo-block. It's only available in app form on in the United States. The other version is available here. I actually really like the other version, the sort of so-called normal version. I think Stephen did an amazing job with it. It's about 80% the same material, but in an entirely new order. And as I was starting to say before, it's not like we didn't just take sequences from the app and repurpose it into the linear version. We went back to the original footage and rebuilt it shot by shot, as it's in, you know.
The whole point of this piece is...
She's saying the whole point of this piece
is just really how the user can interact. And I understand your choice of not wanting the user to change the story depending on the choices.
Yeah.
But the level of interaction, this is what, in my point of view, makes this piece so interesting.
Thank you. Could you hear what she said? You guys could hear that, yeah? Okay. Well, when you translated, right?
One more last question. We have to finish soon.
Oh.
Actually, I have two, but the first one's really short. Did I understand you correctly that because of these intersecting storylines, for purposes of shooting, you had to be pretty chronological?
I can't understand you with your really thick French accent. No, I'm kidding.
I'm sorry.
I'm just joking. We were not able to really shoot. No, we did not shoot chronologically.
Okay.
We just designed it chronologically.
Okay. The second question is, since you just made a joke about it, I was sitting here thinking, you know, comedy is so often made out of bizarre coincidences and crossing story paths. Have you thought about the possibilities of this format doing something comic?
Absolutely. And I'm working on one that is a comedy, I will say. But this was really, really fascinating. So we did this branching narrative thing, which was a giant lesson in so many things for me. Then suddenly we have to do a regular version of it. So not only am I trying to write a piece that can be told from all these different points of view, but also can be told in so-called objective form. I'm going to go to your point. This is about your point. So one piece is very subjective. You're following a character into a story. By the way, I've been doing this my whole life. Literally, my first writing job, I was 19 years old. I've been doing this my whole life. I didn't realize just how significant point of view really is. You're in a subjective story. You're asking entirely different questions. And I never realized it until I juxtaposed that with a so-called objective telling of the same story. Meaning, you're in a subjective story, you don't really know the context. You're learning everything as the character is learning it. You're asking the questions like, what's next, what's next? You're asking very different questions. In the linear version, the version that's available here, you see a little bit from this, you see a little bit from that, you see a little bit from another. He starts way late, and then he cuts back in time to, and you're way ahead of the characters. So that the tension, or the way the audience experiences the tension of the piece is entirely different. When you're ahead of the characters, you're asking way different questions. I didn't even realize how different that experience is. To your point, you talk about cross paths. I mean, look, there are no rules. Like, I've worked in comedy a long time. I'm sure you have too. You can't try to quantify the rules of comedy. It's either funny or it isn't funny, you know? But so often with comedy, it's context. Like, you know something that the character doesn't know, and it makes it funnier. And forgive me, I'm going to quote a movie I worked on. I hate when people do that. But like, to me, one of the movies I wrote was Men in Black. The key moment, when I finally understood the comedic tone of Men in Black, was when I realized that the audience is always going to be just a minute ahead of Will Smith's character at all times. And that's what I talked about the relationship with the audience. It was like the movie was bringing the audience along with them just ahead of the character. And once I realized that, I knew what the comedic tone of it was, but it required the audience to know more than Will Smith knew at every minute. But just enough that they were still being surprised and led through by Tommy Lee Jones. So the problem with this format, as I've experienced it in my limited, I mean, it's 3 or 4 years now, but it's still very limited. It's one project complete and one written and one starting. One of the problems with this format, what we discovered in Mosaic is sometimes it took people in the app version to get through a whole line and begin a second line to actually realize just how tense it was and how complex it actually was. And with comedy, okay, so what that means is in the new one that I'm working on, which is not a comedy, but in the new one that I'm working on, I had to be really clear that you make a choice, and the pacing is very different than it is in Mosaic, but like you make a choice, you're on a path. On that path, how do I make it so that even though it is subjective, I still have tension in the right way, the right kind of tension? How do I make it so that with each choice you make, the tension increases, the suspense increases, that you're continually drawn into it and drawn into it? What is, these are the big questions. So my question about comedy in this format is, just on a purely mechanical level, construction level, how do you construct it scene by scene to be funny on first viewing, as opposed to once you're way down the line and you realize everything else that's happening, then when the person enters the room, you can really laugh. Like in a farce, you know how you'll set up something, they'll talk about a character, and then the character walks in and you laugh because you know stuff that the character doesn't know and the character's discovering stuff. It's a tricky one on a mechanical level. You end up being stuck with doing like gags and jokes and that kind of thing, which to me are less of a, it's not the full body comedy that, so it's tricky. I mean, this form is tricky. The question of, and I think Alon was talking about this at 12:30, but the question of how far back do you want them sitting? And how far forward? It's not the forward engagement of a game, and it's not the back, but it's like, what's the right amount of engagement that keeps the viewer connected emotionally, doesn't pop them out of the dream, as I said before, but also makes the choosing underscore the story you're telling, as opposed to just be a gimmick that is, you're just applying to this story. To me, it's taken quite a few years of work to figure like, oh, okay, I'm starting to finally feel like a flow with it, but it took me quite a few years, and it took me 30 years before that, plus a few years, so yeah. Any other questions? Or?
I guess we have to stop here.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Ed.
Sure.
This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.